Hey, WBSE and Whiskey Network. I'm Bill Varnell. Joining me tonight, as usual, is the Chadman Cadden.
What up?
As special guests, we have Ari Sussman, whiskey maker from Three Chord Bourbon and Mammoth Distilleries, just to name a few, and now tech entrepreneur. And lastly, Cat's Eye Distillery co-owner Gene Nassif. Gene is also a fellow member of WBSE. He's been with us for 5 years, almost since the beginning. Welcome, gentlemen. And welcome also to our WBSE viewing group members. Please post questions throughout the evening. We'll get to them as time allows. And as we always do, hopefully you got one there, Ari. Let's raise a toast.
Oh.
Cheers, Gene, Ari.
Yeah, we'll go
Cheers, everybody. Oh, man. I'll join
Cheers,
you with
fellas.
that.
Gene is drinking Chad Stout tonight.
My glass was out of reach.
And I actually have Three Chord blended in my glass.
Nothing like chugging a bourbon that was distilled before you were even born.
All right, thanks for joining us this evening, guys. We're going to talk about the WBSE Rickhouse and Cat's Eye Distillery and what makes these barrel picks unique that we're doing in WBSE's Rickhouse. So Gene, start us off with some background on Cat's Eye. Let's get the conversation going.
Absolutely. Cat's Eye Distillery predates even me. Founded around 2014 by John Baker. It was named after the Cat's Eye Nebula. My partner, John Baker, is a big amateur astronomer. Absolutely loves doing that, especially during the summer, camping and viewing the sky. I came in around 2018, late 2018, met John through a Facebook group of all things, actually a kind of a spinoff of WBSE for Iowa. And then from there, we created Obtainium Whiskey with the goal of being an American independent bottler. That spun into our first barrels of light whiskey. I kind of rediscovered light whiskey. A lot of people were not bottling it at the time. I think we were probably the second or third to bottle it. But we really had the marketing push to educate the public on what light whiskey was, and then utilize it in blends, etc. We kind of spun that into spirits from around the world. We've done Armagnacs, we've done rums, we've done Canadian whiskeys, Polish whiskeys. I'm trying to think what else we've got coming up. We've got Scotch now. That's on the way in, a 30-year North British. So we will hopefully become a global independent bottler by the end of this year. I mean, I think we already have, but just really expanding through the full scope.
So for our members, would you please describe what a light whiskey is?
Yeah, light whiskey is distilled between 160 and 190 proof, aged in used oak. That's really about the only requirements. Also, you can use new uncharred barrels. The equivalent would be the single grain whiskeys of Scotland. So a very similar comparison. The same goes for a lot of the Canadians. The base whiskey used for blends is virtually light whiskey. It is, by definition, meets the American definition for light whiskey.
So I'm going to take a little bit of this in my glass. Chad doesn't have it because I brought it home with me. There's not much left, as you can see. This is from single cask 419.
Is that one of the ones that we selected?
Yes, this is the light whiskey. This is the 7-year-old, 127.8 proof. I'm still going to save a little bit for you, Chad. Get back to it. Just a little taste in here. And it is, I don't know if you can tell that on the screen, it is rather light looking, no pun intended. It's just kind of golden honey in color. And the note on this is just amazing.
A little fruity, I believe.
Yep.
And of course, like caramel corn, kettled corn, to be more specific. I know both the light and the 26-year-old one, they both put me into the mood of like being at a fair, a street fair or a carnival. And when I'm trying new whiskeys, always like not just sense of smell and taste, or does it put me like experience? And that's exactly where they put me at. I interrupted. I apologize, Bill.
That's fine. That's fine. For me, I got pretty much the same thing that Chad said. I got a caramel apple, candy caramel apple, and candy corn kind of. Chad didn't get the candy corn when we first tasted this, but I got that on the nose. So I'm going to take a sip of it now. I know what it tasted like the last time I had it.
It was freaking bomb. I was really surprised. I wasn't. This was actually my first light whiskeys, and so I was really taken back.
And the flavor just explodes in your mouth. It's just unbelievable.
Chad or Bill, you two both have a background in Scotch. What can you say in comparison to knowing and having tasted many single grains? I'm sure.
Well, being that this is a corn-based grain,
Correct.
It really has a lot of similar qualities, but I mean, obviously, taste is
different.
Worlds apart. Obviously,
you can tell that they're like cousins. I would put it that way. You can tell that they're in the same wheelhouse, obviously executed in different ways. But what I like is the general components, the floral notes, the lighter notes, the candy notes, the sweetness, very similar across the board. And then obviously with the single grain, the finish is everything. And I think the light whiskey has a killer finish. Same with the Canadians, which makes it so good for blending.
It's really, I mean, you saw when I sipped it, I still have that finish going on.
It lasted
towards the end, but it very sweet up front. I'm not sure if the ex-bourbon barrel that it's aged in makes more of a difference with the corn or with a Scotch, but this is more complex than a single grain Scotch that's finished in an ex-bourbon cask, in my opinion.
way more complex. If I'm not mistaken, since this is kind of like totally unscripted, nothing prepared. I know Bill has some of the notes from, our tasting. And I think this one, I had a really kind of crazy note, and it took me a few minutes to really put my finger on it. It reminded me of a cereal from when we were kids. I mean, they still make it, corn pops.
Corn pops.
Corn pops. And it was like, wow, this is just too damn fun. It was such a really neat experience trying something like this, because it's just, you don't see that stuff around here. Living in Pennsylvania, we're a little limited, but so light whiskey leading up to this, our barrel selection, Bill and I had a lot of conversations about it, and we were both like, oh man, I don't know. But as soon as we got to we call it the mid-level one, to the 7-year-old, and we're sitting there nosing and tasting this. Holy shit, man, this is just absolutely out of this world. I didn't expect, I honestly expected this, and I got this.
Yeah.
And very pleasantly surprised.
And full transparency, and I've been in this business for a number of years now, as Chad has, and I don't know if I didn't even ask him if this was something that he knew about or not. I'd never heard of a light whiskey before.
I've heard of it.
Didn't know what the hell it was.
I've heard of it. A lot of it comes from MGP, and I guess other places do it as well. But I know they have a light whiskey program. But it's just something I've never seen or came across, and so it was like, okay, what are we getting into here?
So I gotta hop in here really quickly, because what an amazing conversation. Which is, I'm happy that this conversation is happening, because I've been a huge fan. First of all, I've been a member of WBSE for quite a while, and have loved the reviews, the passionate reviews and informed reviews that WBSE does. And I've been a huge fan of what Gene has been doing for years. Gene and I have been in communication for years. And as soon as I started tasting some of the whiskeys that he was making and putting out, these light whiskeys, it's so interesting, because in the US, we think so much about bourbon. We all love bourbon. Bourbon is wonderful. But we have many styles of whiskey that we produce here, and they're different, right? bourbon is certainly the most popular and the most famous, but what Gene has brought to the market really is this exploration of unique characters in American whiskeys and international whiskeys and brandies as well. And it seems to me like the house style that I'm kind of dialing in on that Gene has been putting out, which I think is, speaking to Chad, what you were talking about, this surprise. You think it's going to be one thing, it's another thing. It's that these lighter whiskeys that aren't over influenced by American oak bring forward these flavors that you never get in new American heavy charred barrels because they're completely obscured by the wood. These subtleties of aroma, even mouthfeel, right, can be totally different in the light whiskey if it's aged in the used barrel versus a new American oak barrel. And it turns out that for me as a whiskey maker, I'm a little bit different than an independent bottler most of the time. I do distill, but mostly I'm blending various whiskeys and then oftentimes rebarreling them. And for me, these light whiskeys and brandies with finesse and whiskeys with finesse from all over the world that Gene's bringing into the market and onto American home bars is sort of reintroducing America to a style of spirit that used to be very popular. And it's these sort of grain forward. What can you do with grain forward, right? Or input forward. People love their fruit forward wines, right? And it seems to me like what Gene is doing, and kind of old world, but it's also everything old is new again, is exploring these grains and the grain character that you can achieve through whiskey if you're not using a specific type of barrel, which is really engineered to cover up those flavors in large part.
And yeah, it's interesting. The more I search down the rabbit hole, even of used casks, secondary casks, for a long time in American history, used cask rye. I mean, they were doing bottled and bond whiskey distilled from rye grain for quite some time, quite a long time, and it was brilliant. I'm still trying to get my hands on a couple of them, but I've tried some of the older. It would be used cask rye whiskey. And it is as American as rye whiskey was American. People don't realize that throughout a lot of American history, the used oak stuff was all over the place. I can't wait. Light whiskey was, I think, the first hurdle that I played with. I brought it back, as people say, that the joke at Beam, apparently, which is like the funniest thing in the world. Like some 28-year-old guy now. They say this guy brought back light whiskey. If anybody would have told us, 10 years ago that somebody was going to sell light whiskey and make it a premium brand, we would have laughed them out of the conference room. But, now that I was able to do that successfully, playing with some of these other spirits, I feel more confident in, whether it be, the Canadians. When I was buying Canadian barrels, when Ari and I were looking at Canadian barrels, people were like, what the hell are you doing? And I think even in the last few months, that's changed significantly. So that is interesting. I'm really excited to explore that. I think a couple more, we're going to have a lot more fun with some other stuff. I think the American malts we can play around with a good bit, especially blending them with scotches, which is on my to-do list. And then the used barrel ryes mixing with the new oak ryes and seeing how that plays out will be fun too.
I should, just because you brought it up. I'm sitting here tasting. I'm evaluating batches of brands that I work with that are coming out, and I have in front of me actually two different ryes that fit what you're talking about right now. One is a rye that's a blend of straight ryes of different ages from Kentucky and Tennessee. Yeah, that's the 3-quart Amplify rye, 95 proof. Right. But yeah, the interesting thing about 3-quart Amplify rye is that it's a blend of ryes at different ages. So you're getting sort of the wood character on the older rye comes through, but you get this grain forward character in the younger rye. And when you blend them together in the right ratios, you kind of get this interesting harmony where it has added complexity. You kind of taste rye whiskey, American rye whiskey at these different steps. The other spirit that I'm currently evaluating, which may be available through the Rickhouse, we shall see, is a 15-year-old, what we call Northern rye at Mammoth. And so Northern rye is a style of rye that's kind of between Canadian and straight rye. It's a blend of new and used cooperage with fully aged spirit, usually new cooperage for about a year or two, and then used cooperage. So this idea that that Gene's bringing up, that there's this huge spectrum of aroma and character to play with, aside from straight whiskeys, which we all love and
Yeah.
should continue to enjoy. But in terms of exploration, there's so much good whiskey available to the consumer right now. We're very fortunate to live with it. As whiskey lovers, we're very fortunate to be around right now, because I don't know if there's ever been such a great availability of high quality spirits.
And
Speaking
some of the
of
stuff, I
availability,
mean, starts to.
Sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say some of the stuff all of a sudden becomes allocated or unavailable, and then people like Ari or myself kind of step in. The thing for me when I heard apparently midwinters this year is going to be either Utah only or very, very limited, which sucks. Like midwinters was and still to this day, the old midwinters was my favorite rye, period. And it's unfortunate that the company did what the company did, not with David Perkins or Dave Perkins, but that provides opportunity. What happens when somebody that has 6-year New Oak MGP rye and 21-year Canadian rye and port barrels hears that Midwinter's Night is kind of not going to happen this year? Just take a wild guess. We can step in to provide these great flavors and at cask strength. Don't get me wrong, we're going all in. Anyway, but the point is we can step in when some of these bigger brands that I think almost lost their what's the best way to put it, their diehard consumer, right? The people that supported them since day one to get to all 50 states. And you can't blame them. They wanted to get to all 50 states, but craft like Ari and myself can step in and provide those similar products.
So Ari, I asked you this question and you explained it very eloquently, just so our members that are watching can understand how light whiskey came about. So can you go into that, please?
How light, we talked about how light whiskey in terms of still development, the Kofi still?
No, when it came on the market and why it came on the market.
Oh, shoot. Remind me, yeah, Gene, remind me this story.
Vodka, 70s. So
Yes,
Americans shifted to clear spirits. The vodka craze came in. Everybody just wanted cocktails. So cocktail era, 70s era, the dinner club era, which looking back on was also amazing for different reasons. That era comes forward and people all of a sudden don't want the oaky rich spirits. They wanted clear spirits. They wanted the light rums. They wanted what else do they want? I think they started to get into tequila for the first time. That was like the first time that tequila really started getting imported. So what happened was the whiskey producers said, we need something lighter. We need something more palatable for the consumer that's going towards sweet, going towards clear, going towards cocktails. So the Seagram 7 of the world, the Crowns of the world, a lot of the Canadians came to in the 70s, started doing the used oak light whiskeys to compete with these vodkas, these lighter rums, etc. So
a similar thing did happen right after Prohibition as well. And what's so interesting about the history of American whiskey, these same cycles happen over and over again. The history of American whiskey is sort of like this case study in history echoing or repeating itself. So a very similar thing happened after Prohibition, where there was sort of a lot of Canadian whiskey available, and it was generally lighter than American whiskey. It was generally distilled above 160 proof and under 189 proof. And really after World War II, in the mid 40s, once again, the sort of consumer behavior in the States turned towards this more Canadian style whiskey because that was the mature stock that was available. And then again, it fell out of favor and more robust spirits took over. And then you have this other cycle that Gene was talking about. And maybe we're going through another version of that right now, right? Where bourbon has taken off so much. And again, there comes in this, it's this dialectic. It's one side, bourbon is at one side of the spectrum. There is no spirit in the world, you can say definitively that's as influenced by oak as bourbon. It's designed to do that, right? It's a wood delivery device, and we love wood and we love bourbon for the same reason we love barbecue. It has all the flavors that for millions of years we've evolved to like. need and really appreciate, and it's right there in those spirits. But yeah, I think a new age is upon us, and it's great that Gene really is leading the charge here.
Yeah. I happen to have a cherry smoked Black Angus New York strip for dinner tonight.
Oh, I bet that's so good.
Mhm.
It is.
Why is it that like Americans love whiskey and they love like smoked meats and barbecued meats? I am obsessed. And I got the sous vide last year, and I've been sous videing everything.
Mhm.
Everything.
I never got into that.
Yeah.
I haven't tried it, so I can't say whether I would like it or not.
Best steak I've ever had, and it's consistent. I cannot screw up a steak with the sous vide.
I can't screw up a steak with a smoker either.
Oh, I've screwed up too many to count. Let me tell you that.
So we got a question from one of our writers from our magazine. Mark Pruitt says, good evening. Is there a sweet spot in the age range of rye?
Wow. New Oak Rye.
The older, the better for me.
And I'm sure you've had the KBD Ryes. The one that I thought was a little over oaked was the Hirsch 22.
Okay.
Might have been 23. I think that one was a little over oaked. I didn't. Yeah.
The best ones I've had have been in the 15 to 20-year range. And I was recently going through some photos, and I found this photo of a pour I had of a Rittenhouse rye that was distilled in 1917 and bottled after Prohibition. And it was a 20-year-old bottle on Rittenhouse rye from Philadelphia. That was so freaking incredible. And then Redemption 18-year-old rye cast strength was just absolutely amazing, breathtaking whiskey. So I like my ryes a little older.
So I
It's
know
a good-
Harry's
it's a
a
good
big
question.
rye fan here, and he's actually into the terroir of rye in his neck of the woods. So what's your opinion on that question, Harry?
Yeah, no, I've been obsessed with rye as a grain and as a whiskey for years now. As anyone who's had the misfortune of listening to me yammer on about rye past when they would like to hear about it. But in terms of a sweet spot, I'll kind of change the question a little bit. And I'll say that there are many different sweet spots for rye, because as far as whiskey grains go, especially North American whiskey grains, and I'll also say Northern European and Eastern European whiskey grains go, it seems to me at this point that rye is capable of delivering the most flavor of any grain. And what we've learned over the past couple years through experiments with different varietals of rye, as well as different distillation techniques, including the 3-chamber still, which functions very differently and produces a very different product than a pot still or a column still, is that I don't know if there's a sweet spot for rye, but we're learning that rye can produce a range of flavors from a grain that I don't know is paralleled in another grain right now. And if you're interested in rye, I think don't look for ryes of a particular age. Look for ryes that are produced in unique ways, matured in unique ways, fermented in unique ways, grown in unique places. If you want to understand sort of the variety of choices that whiskey makers get to make and the changes that physics and time can have on a whiskey, rye whiskey is your whiskey. Because and not just straight rye whiskey. I'm talking about whiskeys made from rye, straight rye being one of those categories, Northern rye being another one of those categories. But even in Europe, we're seeing incredible developments with rye. I think rye is as interesting as any category of spirit. And I think as a category, it's evolving. And we're going to be thinking about rye very differently in 5 years than we think about it today.
The best rye I've ever had, period. Going back to High West, they did a Rendezvous rye. It was recast in New American Oak for 6 years. So it was the original 6 to 16 year that was recast for 6 years. I tried it, now it would be a year and a half ago, so it wasn't that long ago. Easily the best rye I've ever had. Close second, I believe, was It would have been one of Schmier's, Dave Schmier's casks, but the Polish rye was so good. So good that we got from Kazuba and Sons.
Mhm. I think what we're going to find with rye and maybe some other whiskeys, which should be interesting. It gets really interesting because you can do this with light whiskeys. I don't know if anybody is doing it with light whiskeys. It's hard if you're purchasing as an independent bottler, but it turns out that if you use a pot still, this is similar to the 3-chamber still. If you use a pot still, you're able to distill for a while. Your tails creep in. Usually, distillers will kill the still as soon as the tails creep into a pot still. It means you're done with the run. But if you continue going through the tails, just collect them in a separate vessel and throw them to the side. After those fusel oils come out, there are a bunch of flavors that come out that are actually sometimes really nice, full of grain, full of oil. Most distillers just discard them. Can be incredibly oily. These are compounds that volatilize at really high temperatures, close to 100 degrees, right after the fusel oils have already come out. After most distillers stop, there at the end, you can find some really interesting flavors. Distillers used to use that component, that fraction of the distillation, add it back into the hearts. 150 years ago, they stopped doing that. They've started doing that again, which is another way of, you have to use a pot still if you're doing it. You can't do that with a column still, at least not with a normal configuration. You could retrofit, but there's these other abilities to introduce, whiskeys or different components from whiskeys back into what we would consider hearts. And I think techniques like that are one of the reasons why craft is where it's at, which is one of the reasons why where craft is today is where the large companies are going to be 10 years from now.
Yep. Or the innovators.
So you play around a lot with rye, Ari, and blending and growing and trying different strains of rye. Do you
And yeast,
personally and yeast? Do you personally have a favorite, or you like to blend different ryes together? Is there one particular strain of rye that you think is more flavorful?
So I think that's an amazing question, and answering that question has been a project I've been working on for years, and I do not yet have a definitive answer, but I'm sure when I do, people will hear about it. But we're doing a lot of varietal studies on rye, different varietals of rye, different yeast strains for those varietals, growing those ryes in different locations, different soil conditions, different climates, to really understand how all of those factors affect the flavor of the character of the spirit at the end. And then, so as not to be biased, because maybe I would prefer one rye to be better than another, it goes through third-party tasting panels, which is really the right way of assessing quality in spirit. So
how do I get on that? All you have to do is text me, free of charge.
Follow WBSE for more information. No, there's we're actually looking into, right now the tasting panel is kind of all high and mighty and in an ivory tower. But I think because of technological innovations, things like the internet and direct to consumer, there's going to be ways of democratizing these tasting panels. So they don't only include, while it's great to include expert sensory panels that have gone through training, it's really important to include normal geeky consumers. So I think that is something that's going to maybe be coming online shortly.
Good. I want to try all of your ryes. Truly, I want to try the new make through, however old it is, and then try the blends. I'm super excited for those. You can send me samples anytime, by the way. Anytime. I'll give you my 2 cents.
I remember going through and tasting at Bardstown Bourbon Company. I was selecting some rye. I was doing some contract production at Bardstown. And I was tasting rye whiskey samples, the same mash bill, same yeast strain, from different ages, 1 year, 2 year, new make, 1 year, 2 year. And oftentimes in blind tastings, when we just put those samples in front of someone, there's not a major color difference necessarily, or at least if you're doing it in a proper room, you don't want to be influenced by the color when you're assessing the flavor. And folks really loved the grain character of the younger rye, which dissipated later on, which is one of the things that gave us the idea of maybe if you can blend different ages of rye, and you can create a wider spectrum of character.
Yeah, who does that too? Hofstadter's and what was that other company? They're owned by the same people. It's a black bottle. Lock, Stock, and Rye.
Oh,
Lock, Stock, and Rye.
Yeah.
Yep. they've got a blend too that's wonderful, and they do, I think, new oak and used oak, and then they do a 4 to 16 year. I think it is wonderful, wonderful.
All right, we're going to get into this 157 here in a minute, but I just wanted to add something as you were talking about the tails. One of the things I look for in a whiskey that really turns me on to that whiskey is the mouthfeel. I like that oily mouthfeel. I mean, if a whiskey has a nice oily, silky mouthfeel, it's an instant hit for me. Now, of course, it's got to taste good too. But I think a lot of distillers, as you said, take that out of their whiskey, and I don't understand why.
It's hard to get those from a column still, and most large distilleries are using a column still. Column stills, you get great efficiency, but I don't think anyone's going to claim that a column still is going to create more flavor.
The most flavor
than a pot still, right? A column still, which is every major distillery, essentially. These distilleries are large production facilities that are optimized for efficiency. And what we used to see 100 years ago was that you would have a column still with a big pot still or a 3-chamber still next to it. And usually your whiskey would be a blend of the two. And that mouthfeel that you're talking about, that mouthfeel component, would come from the 3-chamber or the pot still, because on those stills you can hit the higher temperatures, which is where the oils come out, which is what creates the viscosity. Right. Otherwise, if you're limited with a column still, you can change your fermentation conditions to create more silky character in your whiskey, but you might be doing it at the expense of other positive characteristics like taste and aroma. So it's hard to know.
A lot of Americans are not turned on to that heavy pot still, bourbon, rye, etc. I think a lot of them, it becomes too much very quickly, which is unfortunate. I love this stuff, but from tasting with like the regular consumer, they're so used to the column that they're not used to the oily, like heavy spirit.
And that's where I think small batches are helpful, because you can take people on a journey, kind of, right? You can say, hey, this whiskey, which I'm going to release in a small quantity, to a group maybe, is the first step in a sort of exploration of different types of flavors that are attainable in whiskeys using these various techniques. And the first one is going to be a little bit more approachable, right? And then we're going to get funky.
Just like
Pete. Just like Pete. And if you come up to Michigan, we should go peat hunting, because the bogs here, the freshwater bogs from the Great Lakes, produce a very unique peat, which are some of our peated, Great Lakes peated whiskeys are coming into maturity, and people are going to start tasting them soon. And I think that when you have peat that doesn't come from salt water, it comes from fresh water, it brings with it fruit. It's totally different.
Yeah, I can believe that. I'm not a fan of coastal peat at all from Scotland. I know there's a lot of lovers out there, but to me, it tastes like Band-Aids and iodine.
There's some that's a little bit better than others, but Bill and I have a tasting next week, I believe it is, with Ben Rioch, and they use a woodland peat, and it's so delicious. And I mean, if this wasn't Scotch, you could like take you to Texas barbecue.
Yeah,
that's what it reminds me of, and it's amazing.
You can imagine either a tasting or a subscription service that explores peat.
Yeah.
Right. In that, once a month or whatever, you could just have different styles of peat. And then at the end of the year, maybe you've gone through and had 12 tastings, 12 bottles of different types of peat, because peat is one of the great, peat to a certain type style, peat in a certain style of whiskey is like black paint to a painter. You use black to make depth, to create shadows. And with black, you can do amazing things with paintings that you couldn't do otherwise. And peat can serve as a very kind of a similar way in whiskeys. You can create shadows.
That's a really great way of explaining that.
Yeah. All right, we've got one more question about ryes, and then we're going to get into this 157 and talk a little bit about what WBSE Rickhouse is doing. So bourbon has seen a lot of change with barrel finishes. With rye being as different as it is is that another frontier of flavor development with it?
I think rye was first. Maybe not first, but like midwinters and what were the other ones? There were a bunch of
Sagamore is
rye.
doing some really good things. They had an absolutely, and I knew it was when we did a tasting with them last year at some point. We had a tequila finished,
Ooh.
Reposado, a 7-year barrel, and I'm glad we saved that one from last because I like rye, but it's not my go-to. I was like, this is going to have a good marriage. Just in my head, it sounds right.
It was really good.
It was a
They
grand
also
slam.
do a port finish. Sagamore does a port finish as well, which is extraordinary.
Wait.
Yeah.
Where is it?
He's got one.
No. I gotta find it. I've got a port finished 22-year rye. Canadian rye.
Nice.
Wow. I'm going to have to have you send me a sample of that.
It is
Rye
really
finishes
good.
so well. Rye, especially
I think
Canadian
it
rye
does.
finishes really well. So yeah, I think in the future you'll see Mammoth, for instance, come out. There's going to be a tequila barrel finished rye. There's cherry bounce finished ryes, maple syrup from a local maple syrup maker. There's a great partnered with folks at Barrel Age Honey. There's a honey finished rye. So rye is just so versatile.
I
Plays well
think
with others.
rye is the American equivalent to single malt Scotch. When I look at rye, it's just the American version of it.
And it has a distinct history all its own. If some people love whiskey because it's great in camaraderie and it tastes delicious. Some people geek out on the history part of it, and I do believe that the history of rye whiskey is the history of American whiskeys to a very large extent.
Without, I mean, Mount Vernon. I mean, come on, George Washington's Mount Vernon rye.
Well, if you really want to get into history too, what do we all forget
Pennsylvania
about in American history?
One of our writers for our magazine, Murray Small, is resurrecting, and I think they're starting to produce an old distillery in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania. And Chad and I visited the distillery before they got into the resurrection of it. But he's writing a succession of stories about the progression of what they're doing and what kind of ryes they're using, et cetera. But these guys get dressed up in colonial garb and do the whiskey, the old fashioned.
They're
wood
fire bigger by one of those accordion.
The bellows, yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you. I couldn't think of the name.
So
it's pretty wild.
I just want to throw this in here. One of our other writers, Joe Galino, is actually he does cigar reviews and pairings with us. And he agrees about the mouthfeel, and it's similar to cigars with the creamy palate coating smokes kind of thing. All right, let's get into this 157.
This one was.
Yeah, it scared the hell out of me.
It scared the shit out of Bill. I had to console him for a couple days before the tasting. I'm excited because
it's just you won't believe it. You guys that are listening, that you haven't jumped onto this barrel yet and bought a bottle of this, or the light whiskey for that matter, you're missing out. This stuff is just fabulous. Go ahead, Chad.
This one was, who the hell sees a 26-year-old whiskey at cask proof, at such a high cask proof? And there's a lot of people like me, proof whores, who really get into the high proof because that's like the truest state of whiskey should be. Just amazing. But once again, we're going to a 26-year-old corn whiskey with 99% corn, 1%. I'm not sure if it's malted barley or just barley, but
malted is my understanding.
Okay. So what the hell are we going to be drinking here, Bill? This is part of our conversation. It's
I mean,
like, are
me and Ari could tell you a story from a year and a half ago and money and millions of dollars. And
uh,
that's a story all on its own, which is bittersweet looking back. I'll leave it at that, Ari, right?
Sure.
we'll pick that up after this.
Yeah.
So Bill and I had a lot of conversation leading up to our first selections for the WBSE Rickhouse. And a lot of it centered around this 26-year-old Canadian whiskey that's 157 proof, crazy hazmat. And I'm thinking, 26 years in a barrel, it has to be funky good.
Yeah.
And what the hell are we getting into? It's like, holy shit. I mean, seriously, it was like all over the place. Him and I discussing it on our daily calls. And so the Sunday he came over and we sat up and had our kit going and our water droplets. And I'm like, I'm going in straight, baby. And he's like, I think I'm going to take 1 or 2 drops. I'm like, no, let's compare it both ways. And holy shit. That's all I sat here for like as soon as I smelled it, I'm like, I look over at Bill, who was sitting on my right, like, are you fucking kidding me? Wow, holy crap. This is absolutely, like, I didn't want to drink it because it smelled so good. Sweetness. Like, I'm thinking, I'm about to have a flamethrower in my face. I've had, I think one of my favorite George T. Stags was the 2016, the 144.1 proof, I think it was, which was amazing. But man, that alcohol was a boom. Right,
That was hot.
That was hot, but it was so good, especially when it opened.
But it's not there with this.
No,
Not there. You get a little alcohol in the nose, but if our members are watching, typically when I taste a whiskey for the first time, when we do live virtual tastings, you'll see me blowing the glass. I want to blow that ethanol off of there. I don't want to smell that. I want to smell the whiskey. So I'm blowing the glass to do it. And I didn't even do that with this. And I was expecting to get my nostrils burned, and I didn't. And the smell, and I'm getting it now. There's a light hint of leather on the nose of this, followed by sweet candy caramel corn, a little fruitiness, but oh my God, the richness that comes out of this it's just unbelievable. You guys, you got to get on WBSE's Rickhouse and buy a bottle of this. If you've never done anything else, a 26-year-old, tell me you've had 26-year-old whiskey. And
the crazy thing, if you don't mind me interrupting about that. So if you went to the website, WBSERickhouse.com, and you look at the price, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's $140. If it said X bourbon or X scotch, it'd be a couple $1,000 bottle.
Yeah.
At least. I mean, it's insane. I mean, for $140 for a 26-year-old that has this kind of crazy, I mean, I'm using the word insane a lot describing this one, but it was fucking wild. Let's put it bluntly. It was absolutely crazy.
And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, this is what happens when you're willing to have an open mind and try spirits from a new place. This is Canada. Yeah. You think, all of the people that were in the groups.
Say no, right? Purple bag stuff.
Yeah. If you say Canada, they think purple bag, they think Canadian club. They have not tried really what Canada has to offer. We need to explore that immediately. I understand Whistle Pig. There is so much more than that. There are wheat whiskeys, malts. I'm sure Ari can talk about those too. There are Canadian malts that are as good as the best Spacesides I've ever had, period.
So I've had a lot of older whiskeys, a lot of great bourbon, a lot of great Scotch, aged, all kinds of stuff. And I can't wait to get my greedy little hands on a couple of these bottles because it's just fucking good. I mean, I was hesitant, and I always try to be forthcoming on things. A Canadian corn whiskey. What the fuck are you thinking? You know, for real, I'm thinking that to myself. I'm like, but it is 26 years old and it's high proof, so it has to have something going on. And that shit has a lot going on. I was
It has
It's real
a
good.
little more.
literally floored.
Be
Yeah.
pleasantly surprised, right? There's the opportunity for all of us to sort of approach whiskey in a new way and have a green eggs and ham moment where
Yeah.
you think
Yeah.
you don't like something, but you never
Yeah,
try.
Sam, I am. I
You think
love
you
this
don't like-
shit.
That's exactly right. And I think you can have a Sam I am moment with this whiskey in particular. I think you guys have selected a great barrel.
I believe the samples you guys sent, all three of them were of the ultra aged were really good. Two of them were exceptional. And the light whiskeys, all three of them were home runs. The other one that we didn't really discuss, what is it?
Is that
The
the
rye,
Wisconsin?
wild rye,
Oh, yeah.
the 5-drop bourbon.
Oh,
You know, that was a really good one. I mean, I think that's a sleeper whiskey. I
That's
really
an
encourage
awesome
people to get
distillery
that.
out of Bozeman, Montana. That you
oh,
Okay,
also got
Montana it
samples
is.
from. Amazing distillery doing awesome regional spirits that most people can't get their hands on, but now they can.
Now they can through the WBSE Rickhouse.com.
And we thank Ari for bringing all this together with MASH Networks. And, you know, if you haven't looked at our website yet, Chad's mentioned it a couple times, you got to go to WBSERickhouse.com. All our bottles are priced reasonably. The 26 year is a little pricey, obviously, but it's 26 years old. You're paying for 26 years in a barrel.
it's also cheaper than
flat
your.
rate shipping. Flat
Yep.
rate shipping. You know, if you buy one bottle, you buy 5 bottles. It's flat rate, same price. You can get it anywhere in 48 of the states. And there's.
I do know that we are starting to run low on bottles. So people better jump on it before they're gone.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of nice stuff come up, and Ari's our man to help us pick some of this stuff. He's going to select barrels that he thinks we would like or our group would like, and send the samples to us, and we'll have them up on our website. And again, we're doing barrel picks. You aren't gonna find these barrel picks in any store, period. You're gonna find them on WBSE's Rick House, and this is a direct-to-consumer from the distillery, goes to the bottler, goes to the distributor, and then to your home. That's it. You won't find it in any store. All unique stuff. This, I guarantee you, this 26-year-old Canadian, you're not going to find. The Obtanian, you're not going to find it in any store. So you got to come to us to get it.
This is
Cool thing
it's a great
we're going to be
selection.
bringing a lot of different product. I know we got a tasting coming up, Bill and I, to pick a few barrels. So we'll be updating the inventory, you know, periodically. And we get to work with some really cool people like Gene and Cat's Eye Distilling and Ari with 3 Chord and Mammoth and some of these places that you really haven't heard of. We were talking about rye. I got a place that's about 15 minutes west of me over by Gettysburg. That has this Laughing Clown rye. Bill brought a bottle over and is like, dude, don't look what I'm pouring you. Try this out. It's going to blow your socks off. The shit was amazing. And it was a younger rye. It was 2.5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But, you know, so we're going to be able to bring this product to all 48 of the landlocked states. Sorry, Alaska. Sorry, Hawaii.
Close. Most of the landlocked states, you can send it to Alaska and Hawaii. Those states are included.
Okay, we can. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
those
we're
Alaska
in applicable markets, not sending it to certain states.
Regardless,
that do not want it.
we're going to be picking up some really cool shit for people. And Bill and I think we have a decent reputation of knowing what's good and what's not. And I look forward to getting stuff to everybody, man. This is a cool adventure. I'm ready to fucking roll, man.
And
I love
it
it.
provides opportunity too for people like myself, for people like Ari, and me and Ari have already had the conversation. If I can, other than Obtainium, which I own outright, with my partner, I've started to have some Scotch casks bottled for me over in Scotland. I'm importing them at this point in time just for myself. I am going to drink the entire cask. Again,
Party at Gene's place.
I'm really excited for that. But the point that I'm trying to make is, once we can figure out the legality of actually getting some of these casks that I've brought in bottled and sent through the distribution network specifically to, your populace, it is going to be crazy. I am so excited of some of these flavors I've come across. And these were barrels that, I'm bringing them in, and I am sharing them with friends. This is not about me making money on anything. This is way less than what you would pay retail, for the actual brand name for these scotches. But if we can start doing that with some of the Scotch independent bottling, think of it like the single malt, what's it called? The Single Malt Whiskey Society, the equivalent of that, but Americans now getting access to that. There are
Gene,
some
this is sorted.
amazing
This is
casks.
taken care of.
I cannot wait.
So
I'll tell you right now, Mystery Orkney 17-year, that is like a third the price maybe of what it otherwise would be if it had the name on it. I'm sure everybody here knows what a Mystery Orkney is. 30-year North British. I've got access to a cask strength Wee Beastie kind of a deal. Maybe you can't say what it is. So excited for what we can do with that.
Yeah, I think what we're saying here, and the reason
Put
why
that up on the Rick House.
the reason I spent the past amount of time with some very smart colleagues creating this mechanism so that independent bottlers, small distilleries, importers, folks that are really pushing the conversation about what whiskey is and where whiskey is going. The point of MASH Networks is to connect those creative suppliers to whiskey groups like WBSE, and make sure that these whiskeys that have great stories and are very interesting, awesome age, compelling for a number of reasons. Some of them are young and they're still very amazing and compelling and should be given a shot. But the idea is I provide samples of whiskeys such as these to folks like Chad and Bill, and they can select which ones they think would work really great for those groups. And then instead of me having to watch people like Bill and Chad enjoy these whiskeys that I'm never going to be able to get my hands on, we created the Rick House, which is allowing group leaders to access rare whiskeys and sell it to their consumers and into the people, the members of their group, so we can all share it together. And so we can sit around on a Zoom and share drams, which is what that's the goal. That's what we're trying to do. We just want to build these communities and share amazing whiskeys.
And we'd love to go even further than that, Ari. We want to become a household name, not just with WBSE, but WBSE is our launch pad, and they're our base, they're our customer base. And obviously they start talking, they share our site with their friends share our site with their friends. Before you know it, it's exploded. And, I really appreciate you bringing this idea to us of a direct to consumer barrel pick site, because why not? Everybody's hunting for barrel picks. They go into a store and say, "Do you got any barrel picks?" Come to WBSE's Rick House. That's all we have. Barrel picks. The perfect barrel pick.
I think we ought to wrap it up here.
Yeah, again, I want to go over the tasting notes on this.
I'm sorry, go ahead,
got
please.
carried away on
We
talking.
did, didn't we?
But the tasting notes on this obviously are, you mentioned this on the last one on the light whiskey, but it's that corn pop cereal again. It's candy corn, a little bit of oak comes through, a little leather, and then caramel on the finish. And it's a bit spicy on the very end as well.
Spice built up real nice.
Yeah. And it does have a nice silky mouthfeel. So this is one you don't want to overlook at 26 years. Again, I'd be surprised, got a WBSE Rickhouse glass here. I'd be surprised if you come up with a 26-year-old whiskey that isn't a Scotch.
Mhm.
How many whiskeys, how many bourbons are out there available to people in a liquor store that are that old? They're just not there.
Or this price. I mean, Van Winkle 25, old Rip Van Winkle 25-year-old was what, like 10,000
Mhm.
or some crazy amount. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it came in a pretty decanter. I mean, not as cool as this one.
Shameless plug. Like, here you go.
But
Tom
Ari's going to
Simone's
be bringing us a lot of unique barrels, and these are things that you're never going to find elsewhere. But WBSE Rickhouse, and remember it, WBSERickhouse.com. That's where you want to go. So, you know, for your own bottle of these very special barrel picks, that's where you got to go. So we're going to wrap it up here, unless you gentlemen have something else that you want to say.
If you guys could hang around for just a couple minutes afterwards, we'd appreciate it.
Cool.
And
All right.
I'm just going to say, hey, WBSE, always remember, go to WBSERickhouse.com, buy a bottle, and take that bottle and you crack it, share a pour.
Crack a bottle, share a pour. Thank you,
Cheers, Al.
WBSE. Thank you, gentlemen.
Cheers, everybody.